Imagine a morning that never knows the sun. You open your eyes not to light filtering through a window, but to the rough echo of voices from the mouth of a cave. A cave that is not a home, not a shelter, but a narrow hole waiting for your body to return and crawl through stone. Corridors for chunks of metal that will never belong to you. And when you rest briefly, leaning your back against the stone wall, you ask yourself, how old are you now? Because no body is ever found whole after a collapse. Only the screech of stone. And then silence. You forget. Because age is not counted underground. Only the weight you lift and how many more days your body can bear it. In the Bronze Age, there was nothing romantic about being a miner. No gold promised, only copper. Reddish-brown metal that would be shaped into swords for wars you would never fight. And jewelry for people who would never look into your eyes. And to get it, your small body must go into the earth, must crouch and crawl through tunnels barely wider than breath. You are not big enough to be called a man, but small enough to slip into rock crevices too tight for grown men. That is why they chose you. Not because you are strong, but because you are small. You crawl slowly, holding your breath as the stone above you groans. The scent of sulfur bites your throat, and the flame of the torch you carry dances on the walls like shadows from another world. Your own breath, and the breath of the boy in front of you, who is even younger. They call this work. But this is not work. This is the slow erasure of a person. There is no wage worth blackened lungs. No food enough for bones that begin to bend. But up there, on the surface that feels like a dream, this metal is precious. Kings want more. And the more they want, the deeper you must dig. There is no time to be afraid. No space to pray. You only know that if you move slowly, you will be scolded. And if the stone collapses, you will be buried alive. Maybe only your hand will be visible, reaching for ground that can no longer be touched. In this cave, time stops. There is no day or night, no seasons, only darkness and breath. Sometimes sounds come from above, sounds of the real world, but they feel like dreams. Waves of wind that cannot touch you. Songs you cannot hear. And maybe today is the last day, but no one knows. Above ground, they might call you a young worker. Underground, you are just the shadow of a child who once was. Your hands are calloused, your back bent too soon, and your eyes have lost the light that children your age should still carry. There is no school, no games, no time to chase dragonflies or listen to stories. Will they know that the bronze statue they admire was paid for with fragile lives? Will anyone care that this land was once soaked in the sweat of children who never had the chance to grow old? But even if no one remembers, you keep digging, because it is the only thing you were taught since you could stand. Not because you had no choice, but because choice was never offered. The only stories you hear are about how much copper must be hauled today and who did not return yesterday. Children are not raised in this age. They are used, and if they break, they are replaced. The world above is too busy carving history to notice who is sacrificed for the gleam of bronze. But you know, every piece of metal is a part of your body. Every scratch on those ornaments reflects a wound on your hand, that never healed. One day, there was a sound inside the tunnel. It's a strange sound. Not stone, not laughter, but something unfamiliar. Then the ground beneath your knees trembled, slowly but certainly, as if the earth itself was breathing its last. You tried to retreat, but the tunnel was narrow. Someone was behind you, someone ahead, nowhere to go. And when the rocks began to fall like a rain of death, the only thought in your mind was not about death itself, but whether your mother would know you were not coming home. But your mother might be in another mine, just as dark, digging hope from a stone that knows no mercy. After a few hours underground, your body starts to feel like it belongs to someone else. You become a machine, digging, lifting, dragging, repeating. Time disappears. Hunger no longer feels like a sensation, but a permanent condition. The torch you carry grows shorter, its shadows wilder, its warmth the only heat you will feel that day. But you are not afraid of the dark. You've made peace with it. Your real fear is the sound of a small crack. That subtle sound that brings death without warning. You wonder if anyone in the future will remember you. Not your name or your face, but your existence. Sometimes, when no one is speaking and the torches have gone out, the only sound you hear is your own breath and the clink of stone against metal. It is not a song, not a work chant. Just a hollow echo rebounding off damp walls that close in like a giant womb that will never birth life, only suffering. You sit down for a moment, trying to rest your back that can barely support your weight anymore. But even as you sit, the dust doesn't stop crawling into your nose. The smell of sulfur, of sweat, of a body that hasn't known clean water for weeks. Here, humans are not distinguished from stones, just as rough, just as silent, just as quickly forgotten when broken. There is no clock, no sun. Only rough guesses about time through your heartbeat and the number of times you've dragged copper sacks. Maybe a younger child, maybe one who just saw the torch go out in their friend's hand. But the crying never lasts long. Not because comfort comes, but because exhaustion makes even sound give up. Every lesson in this place is simple. If you're not strong, you disappear. If you're weak, you're forgotten. And each day your body tests how much it can be broken before giving in. Today, your knee bleeds. Tomorrow, perhaps your shoulder will break, but you'll still show up, because leaving the mine is not an option. It is like hell turned into habit, and that habit plants the illusion that this is how life is meant to be. You live in a primitive rhythm, one hammer strike, one step toward the rusted rail, one push of a wooden cart whose wheels are almost always stuck. And through all that, you do not think. Your mind evaporates with the sweat dripping from your brow. Thoughts of beauty, of dreams, of the outside world have long been wrapped in soil and buried with friends who never emerged from this mine. Sometimes, in the distance, you hear crying. No one saves you. No heroes, no gods, no histories that shine light down into the earth where your body becomes bone on an ancient map. Maybe one day, thousands of years later, archaeologists will find a bronze axe and wonder about its technique. They will praise the era's advancement, but none of them will hear the sighs of children who shaped that metal with their lives. None of them will smell the scorched dust of skin that never had time to wrinkle. They will only see the object, not the story, not the life. The feet of the children in this mine are not the feet of humans free to run through fields. They are wrapped in sticky mud and damp earth that clings like wounds refusing to heal. Their skin has turned a dark gray, not from paint or mere dust, but because sunlight has long become a myth. Hair that was once black is now faded, dry and thin. Age is no longer measured by birthdays, but by the number of days since someone last stood upright without pain. It's just slow steps and heavy bodies heading to shacks too small to be called home. Sleep is not rest, it is only a pause between two destructions. And even in sleep, you are still digging. In dreams, in breath, in the way your hands remain clenched even as you rest. The mine has entered you, and in that darkness, you have become part of it, inseparable. 1 week, 2 weeks, then years dissolve, like fog on a morning that never arrives. In this mine, 8 years old can feel like 8 decades. And often, the children have no more time than that. Their ears are accustomed to a constant rumble, like the world is collapsing slowly. They know the sound of breaking rock better than the voice of their mother. Perhaps a piece of bread. Perhaps a breath of clean air. But these desires must be compressed like coal pressed by the earth. Swollen knees are part of the mourning. Bloody coughing is something not worth mentioning. And if you can endure without crying, it is called progress. Day after day, the mind shapes you not into strength, but into numbness. Feelings once sharp become dull. Fear becomes routine. Even death is merely a rumor that circles, but no longer shocks anyone. If you dream too often, you might slip. And slipping here does not mean a bruise. It means disappearance. The passing cart does not stop. The spilled bucket is not refilled. Everything moves, everything flows, like a current of black water underground that cannot be resisted. Sometimes you even forget you are a child. You only know this. You must keep digging or you will be replaced. Even if their mothers are also there, the voices exchanged are about tools, burdens, or the narrow shafts that must be cleared. No fairy tales, no hugs. Only remnants of human touch wrapped in the need to survive. Mother and child work side by side, not in love, but in the same fear. They know one misstep can end anyone's life, and the mind never chooses who it swallows first. In the stretches of endless seconds, small desires arise. What hurts is not just the work itself. It is the reality that your body begins to believe all this is normal. When night comes and torches finally light the path out, there is no cheer, no joy. If you ask who enters the mind first each morning, the answer is the children. They are the smallest, the lightest, and the only ones who can slip into crevices adults cannot pass. The only markers are the sound of a full bucket, the crack of a whip hitting stone, or the sigh of someone too exhausted to cry. Children don't know dates, only when to wake, when to stay silent, and when not to be caught sleeping. In the mine, sleep is a sin. It is a slip that can bring down walls and stop a life. You are no longer a mere, no longer Yachty. no longer Rika. You are just the strong one, or the thin one, or the quiet one. Without a name, you are easier to replace. You become a number, a burden, or a statistic. And when you disappear, no one records it. No candle is lit, no prayer whispered. Only the whole is sealed back, and the day moves on as if you never existed. This is how the mind consumes, not just the body, but the very existence. They are like pioneers in this underground world, not out of bravery, but because their bodies have no other choice. He had heard about the outside world through scraps of tales whispered by his older brother, about leafy trees, about flowing rivers and a blinding blue sky. So one night, he tried to run. He made it to the edge of the shaft, almost to the surface. But a hungry body and weak legs could not keep up with the slippery stones. He fell back, and the sound of his bones breaking echoed for a long time. After that, no one dared to dream again. The world above became like heaven, described by priests. Beautiful, but too far to reach. With tiny hands, they touch stones that might collapse. With thin backs, they push wooden carts on the verge of breaking. And no one calls this a sacrifice. No one bows in guilt. It is simply part of a system older than compassion. A system that favors efficiency over humanity. In the darkness, time loses meaning. Clocks never tick. The sun never greets. Day can become night, and night can become day. There is a story about a child who once tried to escape. In the mine, wounds are not surprising. They come like daily guests who never knock. Torn hands, cracked feet, eyes cut by splinters of rock. And there are no bandages, only dirty rags tied without care. Blood dries with sweat, and infection grows like mold on damp wood. Some children start coughing blood after the second month. Others stop speaking, not because their mouths are broken, but because their voices are no longer needed. In silence, they become part of the stone, unseen, unheard, only haunted by a life they never chose. But among all these things, the most painful is the loss of names. In the mine, names have no meaning. There are certain sounds in the mine that only those trapped long enough can hear. Not just the rumble of hammers striking stone, nor the faint cracking before a collapse, but other sounds, a kind of whisper from the rock that hasn't seen light in centuries. Like a hum that creeps into your chest and stays there, slowly eroding your sanity. Newcomers may not notice, thinking it's just echoes or creaking ropes, but those who have stayed for months will know. The sound is real. Just heavy breathing, backs resting against stone walls, and small hands trembling as they hold a piece of hard bread or a leftover potato. Eating isn't pleasure, it's duty. The body must keep moving, no matter how it feels. They don't eat to live. They eat to keep working. That's the only reason the mind understands. And the quieter you become, the louder it grows. It slips between breaths, waiting to make you believe the mind is alive, and that it is swallowing you. Sometimes, the adult miners try to soothe the children with old songs. Their voices are hoarse, nothing like a mother's at home, but the melody holds a kind of bitterness that strangely comforts. Maybe a tunnel collapsed, Maybe someone didn't return from the dark bend. Sometimes silence just means someone's final breath went unheard. And when that happens, everyone stays still. No one calls a name because they know there will be no answer. They simply look ahead and keep moving. Because the mind does not stop for one life. It keeps asking, and people keep giving, until there is nothing left to give. These songs are never about hope, but about surrender. The smell of sulfur and smoke forms a thick fog that stings the eyes and tightens the chest. The elders say it's the scent of death. But to the children, it's just the smell of morning. They learn to swallow deep breaths to suppress their coughs so they don't look weak. Because weakness, no matter how small, can get you reassigned to a more dangerous spot. To a tunnel near collapse or a pile of rocks to clear alone. Here, endurance is not just about physical strength, but about hiding your suffering better than the others. About earth that doesn't care for bones. About a sky that never looks down. Songs like prayers that have given up. The children, even the youngest, begin to memorize them. They sing not because they want to, but because it's the only thing they can carry into their dreams. Dreams just as dark as the place they work in. Sometimes the mind grows too silent. This is never a good sign. Silence means something is wrong. There are days when the air becomes too heavy to breathe. And when break time finally comes, which is usually only a few minutes, they sit close together without much talking. No funny stories, no laughter. At some point, the children working in the mine stop asking why. Not because they've accepted it, but because there is no point in asking. Answers never come. Only the stone and the darkness respond, and neither knows mercy. Not with loud words, but whispers. They believe that if you talk long enough, the stones will answer. Not with sentences, but with dreams. And in those dreams, you can leave. You can see the light. You can feel warmth again. But dreams are rare gifts. And when one body stops, another replaces it. Because home is not a place, but a memory. And most of them have been in the mind too long to remember. They only sleep beside the rock, with dirty hands still gripping tools, and eyes that no longer dream. Sometimes someone will hold another, not for warmth, but so they don't feel alone. Because the scariest thing in the mine is not the collapsing stone, but the loneliness that never sleeps. There is no pause, no ceremony, not even tears, because tears need space to breathe, and the mind gives no space for that. Only short breaths and fast steps, always moving, always giving. And often, when someone dreams too deeply, they do not wake up again. Above them, the world keeps turning. The sun still shines. The rain still falls on the fields, and birds still sing. But not here. Underground, time does not move forward. It coils like a snake, biting its own tail. Days feel like nights, and nights feel like forever. Sometimes they hear the sound of horse hooves far above their heads, a sign that the outside world still exists. But the sound only comes briefly, then vanishes. No one knows who passes by up there. Maybe a noble, maybe a merchant, maybe just a farmer with a cart full of wheat. But whoever it is, they never stop. never look down, because to them, the mind does not exist. Or more precisely, it is too dreadful to acknowledge. They need its copper, but they don't want to know the blood that is spilled to get it. Some children, too tired to be afraid, start talking to the rocks. In the unused corners of the mine, the walls are full of scratches. Not writing, not drawings, just random lines that may or may not mean anything. But if you look long enough, you begin to feel they aren't just scratches. They are messages. Notes from children who were once there, trying to leave something behind. Proof that they once lived, once felt, once hoped. But now, they are only silent carvings on walls that keep flaking away. The mind knows no names, no birthdays, no families. Everyone is a body, a source of labor, and when night comes, they do not go home. There is a part of the mind not widely known, even by the oldest workers. They call it the ghost tunnel, not because spirits roam there, but because it is silent and no one dares to pass through. Footsteps echo strangely, out of sync, like the walls repeat only what they want to. The air there feels heavier, colder, and though no creature is ever seen, the feeling of being watched never leaves, like a groan held too long breaking into melody. The smallest children often cry when they hear it, though they cannot explain why. The older ones just glance at each other, trying not to panic. Because if you show that you are afraid, you start believing the sound is real. Some old miners believe that the mine remembers, and that tunnel is part of the memory it refuses to heal. Not because of scary stories, but because of truths too painful to repeat. A rhythm that fills the quiet. But that beat is not comforting. It makes you aware that everyone here is just waiting. No one leaves the mine peacefully. They only disappear. One by one, like stars fading from a sky they never got to see. They only glance briefly, then return to their work. Not out of cruelty, but fear. Fear of losing their own place, or deeper still, fear of realizing they could be next. About the sky he never saw, about the sea he only heard in stories, and about the simple wish to sit beneath a tree. That poem is now buried under dust and the fog of time. But for the few who once read it, it was a prayer. A prayer never answered, yet still alive. So silence becomes protection, and pretending not to see becomes survival. It is said that this is where children who could no longer go on were laid down. They were not buried, for the mine does not offer ceremonies. They were simply left behind the stones that no one moved anymore. The darkness in that tunnel is different. It's not just an absence of light, but a place where light seems rejected. When a child collapses from exhaustion or breathlessness, the others cannot help. At such moments, sounds turn strange. Sometimes a song can be heard, not from a human, but from the stone itself. There was once a child, it said, who wrote a poem on the mine wall, not in full words, but in simple symbols. As the tools wear down, the sound of metal striking stone becomes like a heartbeat. One night, the mine stopped breathing. All tools fell silent. No clanging, no screams, only a silence that pressed down like a heavy fog. They carried torches and thin courage, perhaps born from despair. They found something they couldn't explain. A small cave filled with stone statues not made by men. Not carvings of gods or kings, but tired faces. Hollow eyes that did not judge, but also offered no comfort. Like mirrors of all the souls swallowed by the mine, now staring silently back. Because to give a name means to give meaning, and meaning is a burden too heavy here. So all were left to dissolve in the dust, becoming part of the formless mist that clings in the air. The workers looked at each other, trying to grasp the meaning of that hush. Swallowing mornings, swallowing nights, swallowing years. It does not speak, but all know it hears. It does not move, but all know it lives. And if you linger too long, it will remember you. Not as a person, but as a piece that fits in its belly. A breath that will vanish without a sound. There was no announcement, no accident heard, yet everyone knew something had happened. Children dragged their loads again. Old men struck at the stone walls again. And the dust continued to fly through a silence that bites. Because stories make memories stronger, and in a place like this, remembering is the cruelest form of suffering. They couldn't breathe, couldn't sleep, couldn't understand how others kept standing. But within a week, they stopped crying, not because they were strong, but because they had surrendered. They learned not to hope, and in that hopelessness, they were accepted by the mind's belly. So forgetting became a kind of salvation. Though to forget, one must first lose. But something had changed. The workers' eyes no longer looked only at the ground, but began to glance at each other, not with hope, but with recognition, that they were all slowly turning to stone. And in a world like this, when nothing is said, that is the most terrifying time of all. Some tried to go down into the deepest parts, two places not even the maps remembered. Among those statues, one was still damp. Not from water, but sweat that hadn't dried. No one touched it. They simply stood in fear and quiet understanding. The mine had taken another. Not just a body, but a memory. As if that person never existed, replaced by a stone that stared. After that night, the mine resumed work. As usual, as if nothing happened. The food became more tasteless. Conversations grew shorter. Songs once sung quietly now vanished. And when night came, no one told stories anymore. New children always cried on their first day, not because they were beaten or scolded, but because their lungs didn't know dust. No letters, no news, not even names remembered. Some were only known by the signs they wore. The red shirt, the limping boy, the curly-haired one. And the mine, like a creature that is never full, kept its mouth wide open. There is one tunnel the old workers called the Silent Path. It is narrow, dark, and always damp. No tools are brought there. No orders are ever given to go down it. Yet there are always a few children, teenagers, or grown men found asleep there. Not resting from fatigue, but sleeping because the body could no longer burn. In that place, time steps aside. There is no morning or night, only a heartbeat fading and breath thinning away. They do not bury them, just sat, regardless of season, regardless of age. It devours all who come, silently, mercilessly. And when we who live above the ground try to understand their suffering, we can only imagine it as a dark fairy tale. But it is not a tale. It is a truth buried in the soil, in the bones, in the whispering of stones. Eyes closed, hands on knees. When others tried to touch him, they realized he was gone. Not from exhaustion, but because he had had enough. The mind did not kill him. He chose to no longer live, and everyone understood. Because death, for them, was no longer a tragedy. It was the only rest they ever knew. There are no ceremonies, no prayers. They only cover the body with a layer of dust and small stones, then go back to work. On the first day, he cried. On the second, he tried to escape. Maybe to his mother, or to a memory that once offered hope. To remembers those who tried to resist and punishes them slowly. With coughs that never heal, with wounds that never close, with nightmares that come even with open eyes. And when the mind decides your time has come, it will make you sit and stop, without command, without force. It's just a strange calm, like a cold embrace from within the earth. But the mind does not like voices. So the boy began to speak softer, until only his lips moved. And after a month, even his lips stopped. Now he only worked. Pull, carry, break, repeat. Like a stone that moves by itself, without soul, without meaning. On the third, he fainted from dust, stabbing his lungs. But after a week, he fell silent. His eyes began to resemble those of everyone else. Not afraid, not angry, just hollow. Like a wall that has long echoed soundless voices. Because the mind leaves no room for farewell. Every ending is a new beginning for the stone. And the workers know that one day they too will lie in the silent tunnel. Not because they want to, but because the mind never truly lets anyone leave. Once a child from outside the village came. He was still clean, his skin untouched by wounds, his hair like the morning sun. The boy often spoke to himself, not loud, just murmurs. Some say the mind is not merely a place. It is a creature, ancient, hungry, and filled with resentment. Once an old man sat at the mine entrance. He didn't move, didn't say a word. Days pass, names are forgotten, and the mind keeps digging. At the bottom of the deepest tunnel, there is a wall not marked on any mining map. It is not labeled, not fenced, not guarded, but everyone knows about it. They call it the silent wall. There, no echo exists. Even the sound of a hammer refuses to bounce. Not because they saw ghosts, but because they felt something in their chest that made breathing difficult. They say the mine used to be shallow, just a small hole. But those first people dug deeper, descending into a world without bottom, until they could no longer climb up. And that silent wall is the final point, the place where they gave up. A place where time loses meaning and life becomes a count of motions. There is no ambition, no victory, only survival. It's only day after day. And for many, that is already enough. Because hope was buried long before they descended into the ground. What remains is routine, like breath going in and out, never touching fresh air. Not from fatigue, but because they heard something within the earth older than light. to walk in darkness without a purpose, simply because the surface world gave no other choice. They do not know how every second brings the chance that a collapse will come, and their bodies will be swallowed by the earth without trace. They do not know because their world still has sunlight, hope, and names, as if an ancient sadness had crept inside them, indescribable, only felt. And after that, they never went back to the silent wall, not out of fear, but because their hearts knew that place was not for the living. It feels like a place rejected by the world, as if time itself doesn't want to linger. Some say it used to be a door, now sealed by something not made of stone. Not a human voice, but like a whisper of breath or stone speaking. Not loud, not clear, but enough to make you want to cover your ears, because the sound carries a coldness that reaches into your bones. A sound that makes you feel alone, even among many. Sometimes the bravest children walk close, only to return with bowed heads, saying nothing, as if nature itself signals that this is the limit, that humans may go no further, that beyond it lies not just more earth, but something that must not be opened. And the workers understand, not because someone told them, but because their bodies refuse to go near. Every time a man tries to approach, his body grows heavy, his mind fogs, and his heart feels incomplete. Some believe that the wall is the final remnant of the first miners who perhaps never left. Sometimes, when the night is very still, when all tools have stopped and no footsteps echo, someone might hear a faint sound behind the wall. But the mine never stops. The wall still stands, never dug, never touched. That is why this mine is not just a workplace. It is a place of reflection. In the world above, those born under blue skies will never understand what it feels like to become part of the stone. Yet not every story in this mine ends in silence. There are also small whispers growing among the stones. A child who draws faces on the tunnel walls with charcoal, faces he claims to see in dreams, though he has never met them. An old man, too weak to swing a hammer, now sings ancient songs in a language even he does not understand, just because it keeps his heart from breaking completely. Not just metal, not just wages, but some kind of recognition, some kind of affirmation that their suffering is not meaningless, that this dark hole is not just a walking grave, but also a record of who they are, of seeing the sea, of feeling clean wind. But the longer they stay in the mine, the more those dreams fade. Not because they gave up, but because they forgot how hope feels. The mine slowly takes their memories, not violently, but with time, each day like a stone wearing down the soul. Slowly, quietly, and certainly. People who willingly lived in the belly of the earth so the world above could shine. When this mine is truly abandoned, and the tools are left to rust, and human voices no longer vibrate through the tunnels, someone will come here. They will walk in silence. Listen to the sound of the walls, read the names carved in stone, and feel a silence that is not ordinary. And maybe, if they are sensitive enough, they will understand that this place once held breath, that in this darkest of places, there once walked lives that kept moving forward. Even without light, without cheer, without a happy ending. They are the shadows of the light, never seen, but without them, light would never be whole. A woman who descends into the mine only to listen for her husband's voice, which she believes still echoes behind the stone wall after years of being buried. People find ways to survive, even in a place like this. They bring a piece of cloth from home, a slice of dry bread, prayers that are cracked but not forgotten. They carve the names of their children into the stone with the tip of an iron rod, as proof that they remember that beyond all this darkness, there was once a life they knew. They sit against the walls, eyes vacant, ears tuned to the sound of water dripping from the ceiling. That is all they have, the sound of water and the rising and falling of their chests. But that is enough, because for them, life is no longer about happiness or sorrow. Life is simply about staying alive, and in this underground world that is already a kind of miracle. A name on the wall becomes like a little lantern. It gives no light, but it carries meaning. That the person who once lived here was not just a pair of working hands, but a feeling soul. And somehow, the deeper they dig, the more they feel like they are searching for something they cannot describe. There are nights when they cannot sleep, even though their bodies are broken. The younger ones sometimes dream of leaving, and perhaps one day. Outside the mine, the world never knew who they were. Their names do not appear in history books. There are no statues honoring them, no official records of how they endured 1,000 nights without hope. The world only knows the metals from this mine. Now, bronze for weapons, jewelry, statues of kings and gods. The world worships the product, but never remembers the hands that shaped it from the darkness. They, not only their suffering, but the fact that their suffering is so easily forgotten that their voices are only echoes in old pits, that their faces are just faint shadows on stone, that their lives are only specks of dust that eventually fell silent. But even if unremembered, they still exist. They still breathe in the mine walls, in the metal that still shines, in the story we whisper tonight. The Bronze Age miners did not live to be remembered. They lived so the world could keep turning, so the wheels of civilization would not stop mid-journey. They lived in shadow, and they died in silence. Every abandoned garment, all of it is part of a grand poem that was never finished. A poem written in dust and blood, in sweat and final breaths. And that poem still trembles underground, even if no one reads it. Their children inherited hammers. We have choices. They may think of the glory of ancient times, but few realize that behind that glory there were broken bodies, lost voices, and dreams that died young. Those who dug the metal from the earth never saw what they made. But without them, the world would not know splendor. But they did not. They were born in shadow, and there they were shaped. They never asked for light, because even shadows can be home if it is the only place you have. That is what made them different. They did not live for hope. They lived for endurance. They did not write history, but they are the foundation of it, not legacies. Their wives inherited worry, not protection. Their bodies were buried near the mine pit, or sometimes simply left to become one with the earth that had long forgotten the scent of life. No ceremony, no prayers. Only silence. Only the earth slowly covering them, as if wishing to forget everything. But the earth never truly forgets. It keeps everything. And one day, it will whisper it all back to those who are willing to listen. Because this mine is not just a workplace. It is a silent theater of human pain left unspoken. Every scratch on the wall, every broken tool. Today, it may be hard for us to imagine what life was like back then. We have light. We have exits. And when someone today stands before a bronze statue of a god or holds an artifact from the past, perhaps that is the true tragedy of the Bronze Age miners. But before we close the night and let our eyes fall shut, let us sit for a moment at the mouth of that mine. Sit in silence without speaking. Listen to the wind that slips between the cracks of the stone. It carries more than air. But to those who lived there, the mine was the entire world. There was no world outside, no future, only today, only this moment. So time never moved in a straight line. It moved in circles, like a spiral staircase that never brought anyone out. Every day was a repeat of the last, only heavier, darker, deeper. And somehow, people learned to survive even when there was no hope. It carries the stories once buried, the voices that never had the chance to escape from dust-choked throats. They didn't know of wars, of alliances, of the grand history written in palace halls. But their hands dug copper that would eventually become the swords of those wars. An irony that made no sound, yet repeated across ages. They were not just small parts of civilization's machine. They were its heart, beating in the dark so that light could shine elsewhere. In that stillness, perhaps we can hear the heartbeat of an age long gone. We cannot save them from the past, cannot change what has already turned to dust, but we can remember. And in remembering, there is a kind of recognition that they existed, that they breathed, that they once felt fear, exhaustion, hunger, and loneliness, and that their suffering was not in vain. If today we can sit calmly and understand the value of a single life, perhaps we can see faces never painted, but once real. Small eyes staring into darkness, dirty hands feeling along the walls in hopes of finding air. To some, a mine is just a hole, a place where things are taken to be sold. They never knew of the kingdoms that ruled above, never cared who was king. The king never descended into the pit. And we, here, thousands of years away from them, can only try to trace their footprints. The Bronze Age mine is a wound embedded in the earth. It does not scream, but it never truly heals. Every time the ground is opened and the remains of those buried there are found, the earth reminds us that civilization has a price. And that price is sometimes not paid in gold, but in crushed bodies and silent souls. Among the unmoving stones lie voices that can only be heard by hearts willing to listen slowly. And tonight, we have listened together. So when the lights finally fade and the screen turns dark, allow this story of the mine to linger a little while in your mind, not as a distant and foreign tragedy, but as a dim mirror reflecting how fragile humanity becomes when faced with greed and necessity. We have walked together through the tunnels of stone and smoke, touched the cold metal that never truly paid the price of the bodies broken for it. A mine may have collapsed, but its story will continue to live in the gentle rhythm of our memory. Let this story be your lullaby tonight, not to frighten you, but to remind you of how deep and heavy the roots are that hold up the world we now find so bright and clean. And if tomorrow you wake and the world feels lighter, remember, it may be because someone long ago crawled through darkness for a future they never saw. Yet what we carry home is not pity, but deep respect. Respect for those never named in history, but without whom history would never have taken its breath. They have no monuments, no names etched in books. But those old mines, those crumbling tools, and the bones that lie quiet beneath the soil are more honest witnesses than any marble plaque. Every drop of sweat, every wound that never healed, is part of humanity's long narrative. We are the inheritors of their exhaustion, of a bravery not chosen, but lived because there was no other path. Now, as night grows deeper and words reach their end, let silence take over. That is where they remain. In that silence, they are present.